Nowadays, a lot of the most powerful items in the game are actually Runewords, but this was not always the case. Now today, let's take a look at these incredibly powerful and rare unique items that used to be the most god tier items in all of Diablo 2. Now first up in line here, we're going with Bartuk's Cutthroat. This was the absolute go-to on a ton, if not most assassins back in yesteryear. We're talking the early 2000s. Now, nowadays, this really gets beat out by really runewords that aren't even really intended for the assassin. Now, of course, there is Heart of the Oak. Now you get 3 to skills. You can see right over here, the assassin gets 2 to assassin skills, and then just a 1 to martial arts. So if you're going with a trap assassin, you're actually only getting 2 to skills. The Heart of the Oak gives you 3. You get way more stuff with that along with the Heart of the Oak. The biggest thing being the 40 to all resistance you can get. You also get faster cast rate, which doesn't help the traps out per se, but can help you out in other instances, such as teleporting around on the assassin. So unfortunately, Bartuk's Cutthroat back in the day was used all the time on assassins. Now it's used almost none really, unless you're trying to make almost like a meme build dual claw setup. Even if you're going with some sort of martial art assassin nowadays, you're obviously going to be using Mosaic since it's the most broken rune word in the entire game. Now we'll glance up here at Homunculus. Now, while this is still pretty dang good on a Necromancer, it really isn't used as much as it used to be. The main reason is it's probably, well, along with a lot of the rune words, one of the most broken and overpowered ones, but you know, what are you going to do about it? And that is the Spirit Shield. Getting the 2 to skills, getting a bunch of cast rate, you get a bunch of res, just a ton of things on Spirit Shield. And while you get almost a lot of that stuff here on the Homunculus, it really doesn't compare to what you get on the Spirit. Also, obviously easy to make a Spirit. You just need Tal, Thul, or Nam. And then that 4-socketed shield, obviously. And you never know when you're going to find a specific unique that you're really looking for. So here it is, once again, another item just completely kind of pushed out by modern day runewords. Next is one that didn't get completely pushed out. I'm actually using this one right on my Fists of the Heavens Paladin, but it used to be the go-to for essentially every single one. But there are a couple different runewords that kind of pushed out the Herald of Zakarum. So it's not the absolute king. Used quite a bit and still very good, but not the absolute king for Paladin shields. So we'll be talking about, once again, much like the Homunculus for the Necromancer, the Spirit Shield. You put that in a Pally Spirit, so you get the 45 all res on the base. You obviously get crazy amounts of hit recovery. You get FCR, making your hammers cast faster, or whatever it is you're casting. You can teleport faster. So this one is definitely still used quite a bit. It's not completely pushed out, but I wanted to mention it just because of how god tier and how every single paladin that I can recall, you know, back when we were kids used this, but not so much nowadays. And now one that I use all of the time, but apparently I'm in the vast minority here, and that is actually the Oculus. Now, I love it. Stick an Istrune in it. You get up to 80 magic find on your weapon. Absolutely amazing. All skills, cast rate, but most people cannot possibly stand that 25% chance to cast level 1 teleport when struck. People talk about getting how it kills them all the time and stuff like that. I almost would never get killed by this 1 to teleport because, well, it only happens when you get hit. You either shouldn't be getting hit if you're a sorceress, or the one way that it annoys me is if I'm a tally stomping Nova sorceress and it's constantly teleporting me away from the other monsters, but actually I want to be right on top inside the giant pack. But a lot of times people go with a different rune nowadays that can be used across all casters, but mainly, from what I hear anyways, they don't use Oculus because of that level 1 teleport, and they go with Heart of the Oak. Obviously 3 to all skills, the 40 cast rate, it's got a bunch of all res, and y'all know it's on Heart of the Oak, but the Oculus, while still used by a lot of people, including myself, it really is not used nearly as much as what it used to be. Now, this unique wasn't the best possible one back in the day. It was kind of like the second tier, but it was used quite a bit, but now it would literally never be touched, and that is the Hellslayer. Unfortunately, this website doesn't have the unique picture, and I don't even think that's a picture of the right base, actually. But that's neither here nor there. But the main thing on this Hellslayer is the +2 maximum damage based upon character level. So you could easily, just on the base item, if you were a high enough level, you're having 500 or even 600 to max damage, which back for then was very, very great. Nowadays, we of course have Breath of the Dying that kind of beats it out. We've got Grief. We've got just a ton of things. Even if you're throwing Obedience in some sort of polearm, just many dozens, probably almost runewords that make this, not used anymore. But even if I got my hands on one of these on my Barbarian back in the 2002, I would have been ecstatic. Here's an armor that was like in every single Magic Find character type of item. We're talking about Scalders right here. Now, this was pretty much the go-to, that 1.25 Magic Find per level all the time. I tried to get one of these, and for the longest time, I couldn't until I played for, well, an incredibly long amount of time to gather up the wealth to be able to trade for one of these. But, of course, nowadays, what almost every Magic Finder uses is, of course, the Enigma. Man, that powerful, incredibly crazy rune word. It's got the Magic Find based on character level as well. Now, it is just one, but you get so many other things. You get 2 skills instead of 1 that comes in the Scalders here. Of course, for anything besides the Sorceress, you, of course, get that teleport as well, which kind of makes it required for a lot of builds. That increased Magic Find efficiency on Enigma just wrecks, absolutely wrecks anything you can get on pretty much any other armor. But man, Scalders, Ire, back in the day, especially if you found one Ethereal, which somehow in my entire life, never found an Ethereal version of this, was absolute goated. And one other armor that was on at least every single melee character, I know I had it on my Amazon for sure. It is still used sometimes for regular player versus monster type of play, but I mean, usually not in my experience, but we're talking about the Shaft Stop. The main reason was that physical damage reduced by 30%. It does also have life on it as well, but that's pretty much it. But back in the day, I don't know whether it was maybe some different changes and some patches and stuff. This really did help you out and save you a ton. Nowadays, it does as well. You can throw in a mercenary to help out. But once again, Runewords kind of overpower this in pretty much every circumstance. Now, bows are very interesting because there were several different unique versions of stuff that you could use. One that was kind of like the B tier, the Eagle Horn right here. I couldn't even get my hands on one of these, to be perfectly honest. So this one was very, very good with the enhanced damage. It's got the 2% max damage per character level. Ignore target defense, so regular monsters you're hitting every single time anyways. And on top of that, for the stuff that you wouldn't hit every time, 6% or 6 attack rating per character level. So Eagle Horn was a great like second tier option if you couldn't get the very next one here. And of course, we're talking about the Wind Force. This thing was so insanely rare back in the early 2000s, back when we were kids. I'd never even seen one like in real life. Someone showed me one. You log into the dial-up internet and they go ahead and find one to show you it, and the jaw just drops to the floor. Now, this one was so good that even nowadays it is used quite a bit on Boazons, but there are definitely rune words such as aka Faith that some people would say is definitely more powerful than using a Wind Force. And while not necessarily a bow, here is a crossbow. It's used in the same spot on the same types of characters. We're talking about the Burzia du Kayananan. Well, we'll just call it what we did back then, the Burrs. This one had the huge 2.5 to the maximum damage based upon character level. But the crazy thing on this one had the 100% chance to pierce. Now, back when we were kids, back in the day, when you pierce something with guided arrow, it could infinitely pierce. So it would go through the monster and just keep going back and forth, just one after another as fast as you shot them. So if there was any bosses, any singular individual monsters that you wanted to take out, I mean, just in a few seconds after you have several of these going back and forth over and over and over and over again, the infinite guided arrow thing was absolutely crazy. Now slipping into a bunch of melee type of weapons, and we're talking about right here, Schaefer's Hammer. Now this was used a ton on, I remember seeing a bunch on Druids and really like Zealers pretty much, but of course on almost any melee character nowadays. We're talking about people throwing on a Grief most of the time, and I did mention before, Breath of the Dying, and a few other ones, maybe some lower ones, some Death, and even some more newer rune words. But once again, we're getting a lot of these, and you notice on a lot of these older uniques, what was kind of the selling point here? Increased max damage based upon character level. So while this is only 100 to 130 enhanced damage, this max damage boosts that up a bunch. One of the selling points here, obviously, as well, down at the very bottom, 20% chance of a level 10 static on striking. So especially if you're zealing, swinging super fast, you're pretty much staticking like once a second, chopping down a super large amount of their health. A benefit for this back in the long times ago when we were kids, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, static worked in hell difficulty, staticking monsters all the way down until they had literally 1 health if you kept casting it over and over. And I believe even with this 20% chance to cast on the weapon, that's the way it worked as well. So that's probably why this was such a go-to item, back when we were kids. Nowadays, this is still used sometimes once in a while. Maybe it's more of like a meme build type of thing because Grief probably overpowers it a ton, but it can definitely still be used nowadays. Another item similar to the Schaefer's Hammer is actually right up over here, the Scourge, and that is Stormlash. And pretty much it had a similar reason for Schaefer's as well. It had a 15% chance of a level 10 static on striking. This is once again still used once in a while now, but a little bit benefit here. It does have a higher enhanced damage. It also has a good amount of attack speed here as well. Other great stuff here. Obviously, you're getting crushing blow on Stormlash as well. But yeah, similar to most melee characters, this kind of gets squished out by how god tier Grief is. Now, this is kind of a low-level item. You can find it incredibly early. It only requires level 41, but actually a ton of sorceresses and even Javazans I remember using this on. The Lidless Wall, and there's probably many others. I'm sure just not those ones, but that's specifically the two characters I played a ton back in the day. Now, 1 to all skills, cast rate, and the huge one for the Javazans, mana after kill. You'd run out of mana all the time on Javazans, but much like the Paladin Shield I talked about earlier, this one only having 1 to skill, Spirit has 2. Spirit has up to 35 FCR on it, and it even has a ton of all res on the Spirit. So Lidless got absolutely annihilated by the Spirit Shield. But, well, back in 2002, I wanted to throw this on like pretty much any character that wasn't up close getting hit. If you were up close getting hit, you would use this other item. And that is right here, the Storm Shield. Now, in a lot of cases, once again, it's getting pushed out by the Spirit Shield, but this is actually used quite a bit. And from talking to the community, I'm not a huge hardcore player, but hardcore still uses this a ton with the block rate, with the physical damage reduction. It does have some resistances on it as well. So Storm Shield still used, still great for survivability nowadays, but kind of one of those once again, it kind of gets pushed out by the Spirit Shield for how easy it is and how cheap it is, kind of gets used a ton. And now last up, one of the most godliest of the godliest, and that is the Grandfather. This was probably one of the most sought after items back, when we were kids, but that's because the Barbarian, especially Whirlwind Barbarian, was one of the literal most powerful characters in the entire game, and this was the most powerful item for it. Now there was also some Cruel Colossus Blades of Quickness and Evisceration and different things like that, but the Grandfather was just so rare and everybody wanted it so badly. It's another one of those ones, much like the Wind Force. It was just literally a myth in my mind until one of my friends showed it to me on the internet. Now you can see all this stuff right here. And once again, like a lot of things, it's got 2+ to the maximum damage per character level. And this was like a god tier, like extra stat on an item, as you can tell, because it's on so many of these. And well, of course, like all the other melee characters I talked about, like Breath of the Dying and Grief, kind of pushed this one completely to the wayside. Now, can you still actually use this sword nowadays? Yeah, you definitely could. You can kill some stuff, but yeah, it's just on a magnitude lower than things like Grief.